episode 65 of It's Never Sunny in Seattle, a Seattle Mariners emergency podcast. I'm your host, Anders Jorstad, joined alongside my co-host, Mikey Ahedo. And Mikey, I think we jinxed ourselves, doomed ourselves, whatever you want to say, in the last episode when we said, we'll record every couple of weeks. If something happens, we'll talk about it. And the Mariners did, in fact, make something happen. So let's talk about it. The Mariners made a pretty exciting trade and rarely actually rumored before the Mariners made the deal. Last night, there was some chatter that the Mariners were in on Teoscar Hernández, which is, another freezing cold take by me because I think I said on the last podcast, when was last time we heard a Mariners trade rumored before it happened? And here we have another one. But the Mariners did acquire the outfielder Teoscar Hernández. They gave up Erik Swanson and left-handed minor league pitcher Adam Macko, who we also talked about on the last show. When the trade came down, a lot of people thought the return to Toronto was very light, but I've seen people kind of, coming around on it for the Toronto side in the time that has passed since. What did you initially think of this trade, and has your opinion on it changed at all since then?
Well, I thought we were going to give up Chris Flexen at first, based on fucking, is it Morosi? John Morosi? Morrissey? Yeah.
Morosi, yeah.
Like Jim. So that was a disappointment. That would have been pretty rad. But, I was disappointed initially, just like in terms of like non-analytical thinking, just vibes. Because I love Erik Swanson and always have since we got him. I was pretty intrigued that we gave up Macko. I think he's probably, I don't know, like, I know, so Esti Rivera did a write-up at Fangraphs, quoted Longenhagen, who he had talked to, and said he's got kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing where, like, sometimes he pitches backwards, so he throws the lowish 70s curveball, the gyro slider a lot, both of which are pretty good. I think the curveball's probably got the better shape. And then he's got the flat fastball. But it seems like he's super inconsistent. I don't think he's a starter. I think if you can get an all-star outfielder for, I think, a very good reliever, and someone who's pitching in what, Double-A?
Not even. He finished the season in Everett.
Like, fuck yeah, whatever.
Like you said in the last show, those guys don't even exist. So
I have actually. Let me check my DMs. I have heard some really fucking wild. I think.
Wild good.
Yeah, things about Macko. Metrically. So that's the thing. Let's see.
Well, I know, on a bio side of things, he would be the first Slovakian-born baseball player since like the 60s or something. So that's, he's got that going for him. That's pretty cool.
You always have the nice, the nice fun facts.
Well, my grandfather was born in a small town adjacent to the Slovakian border, so I think I can claim some sort of kinship there.
I've got a comp for the curveball. And I don't know what the comp for the fastball means, but I also have a comp there. Are you ready?
Sure.
The comp for the curveball is Rich Hill. That's a really fucking good curveball.
Okay.
Yeah. The fastball is Jeffrey Springs, which is like, sounds like a Rays pitcher.
He's pretty good too. Yes.
Is he?
He was. Yes, he was. He was one of those. He was one of the players in the Rays who wouldn't wear the LGBTQ patch. That's like the only thing I remember him for.
Yikes. So I'll plug that into, or I'll go look at the pitch leaderboard. I think that means he has a fastball, a really flat fastball with lots of run, which is a really good type of. I mean, that's like Paul Sewald, So I'll plug that in, see what the vertical approach angle is. So at least metrically, it seems like he runs kind of hot and cold, but that's a really interesting player. Jeffrey Springs is like, I don't know what if he elevates a lot, but like a 4.5 vertical approach angle, so it's not like he's not a freak. Um, but he does throw from a pretty low release with pretty good uh induced vertical break. So I think Matchko is probably going to be pretty good. But
Well, he's probably going to have to be a bullpen pitcher, partially because his walk per nine last year in Everett was 4.7, which was a full walk better than in 2021 in Modesto.
mm,
So I do not think that's going to cut it. He also has had a lot of injury problems. He only had 8 starts this last year, and I don't think he's ever reached double-digit starts yet as a professional. He had 38 innings.
mm,
But as you're mentioning, the stuff is super good. 14K per nine. Like,
yeah.
there's so many players like that, and I think the Mariners have kind of struggled to turn those guys into elite game-changing starters. I think the Brash thing is still a TBD on that front,
Mm,
obviously, because they're going to try him as a starter again. But this is turning they have developed him to an extent because they drafted him as like a 17-year-old, I think, out of high school. So they have developed him to this point, and they definitely developed Swanson. They turned him from like a up and down quad A boring starter guy into an elite shutdown reliever. So the Mariners no doubt turned an organizational strength into what could be a very big impact bat in the lineup for Seattle. So one of the main reasons I know people are, maybe down on this trade from the Seattle perspective is this is a rental. Teoscar Hernández is a free agent at the end of 2023, and also the Mariners are taking on significant salary compared to what they gave up. He'll be in his final year of arbitration. He's projected for around $14 million. So that is like a $12 million upgrade from whatever Swanson is likely to get. So, I'm sure Dipoto and Hollander will use this as an excuse for potentially not spending because they'll say, well, we did take on 12 million extra dollars with Teoscar Hernandez. I wouldn't be surprised if they extend him, but even if they don't, they could still tack on a QO to him next year if he has another good season and potentially get something out of it. So, they did pay a rental price for a rental player, but yeah, I'm excited about the return for the Mariners. I know that we do miss Swanson, and I know you had some good things to say about him, but I think Toronto needs him more than we do at this point, especially because we can pump out bullpen pitchers like it's no problem.
I do.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So last thing I'll say about Matchko is apparently he throws a legit like sweeper. Which take that for what you will, and maybe that's why it's so like Jekyll and Hyde. I think that phrase is so dumb. Um, and then I mean I don't know how much time we want to spend on Erik Swanson. I'm going to write something up tonight after we're done, but
oh yeah,
very famously not used, in the playoffs until the last game in extra innings.
right.
On the season, only ranked 6th in the bullpen in pitch leverage index behind Diego Castillo, which is like, okay, that's whatever. And if you want to count him, Drew Steckenrider, which is at least 10 innings. Like, take that for what you will. And barely more than like Sergio Romo, which like all of these guys, I forgot that they even were a thing.
I forgot Romo was a thing this year.
Right. And then if you want to look at like pitch leverage index when they enter the game, which is probably a better thing to look at, he's 5th. So I kind of tend to think that even though they pitched him in some spots that the Mariners didn't particularly trust him, and we really saw that in the playoffs. There were a lot of
Well, I
spots,
heard some theories. I heard some theories that it was because of Cal's thumb, and I guess because of Swanson's repertoire, they thought that would potentially do more damage than some other pitchers would to his injury.
That's interesting. I could see that. I mean, it's not really high heat, but the splitty I could
Right.
see. So I don't know, but I tend to think that the Blue Jays are getting a diminished Erik Swanson. That's based on what I was looking at earlier. So take that for what you will.
Do you want to talk about Teoscar a little bit before we dive into some questions that we have?
Let's.
All right. So Teoscar Hernandez, you may remember him specifically from clubbing 2 home runs in the Mariners' triumphant comeback win against Toronto in Game 2 of the Wild Card Series. But he is that player. Like, he is a fucking slugger. Like, that's what he does. He hits a lot of homers, and that's what the Mariners seemingly needed. I mean, we saw that later on in the postseason that the Mariners just like, especially in that extra innings game, it was very evident how the Mariners just needed more big bats. And, Jared Dipoto loves to use the word lengthen the lineup, but this trade certainly does accomplish that. Here's some fun StatCast numbers for Teoscar last season: 96th percentile in exit velocity, 94th in max exit velo, 98th in hard hit rate, 86th in xwOBA, 78th in xBA, 95th in x slugging, 94th in barrel. He's up there and everything. All the things that you want to see from a hitter, he does really, really freaking well. I've seen people bandy around all sorts of slugging percentage statistics for him, saying, he's top 5, top 10, and, every list that you can put on when you stretch out, in the last 3 years, in the last 4 years. This guy is as consistent as it gets. And this is, in that way, very reminiscent of the Eugenio Suarez acquisition. But I think the only difference is that Teoscar did have a good last season. So the Mariners are not banking on a miracle bounce back. This is a guy who has been this player very consistently his whole career. He has not yet had, knock on wood, a really poor offensive season. Last year, his WRC plus was just about in line with his career of 120. He had 129 last year, which would have been third best on the Mariners, behind just Julio and Eugenio. So that makes a pretty good, top 3 hitters in the order. I mean, best 3 hitters in the order, I should say, going into 2023. And if they bring back Haniger, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later, I think that really, really makes that outfield sparkle a little extra. The one drawback, and people are kind of likening this acquisition to Jesse Winker for this reason, is that he doesn't field very well. But it's a big difference from the Winker side of things. Winker's outs above average last year was -10. Teoscar's was merely -5. So he is literally half as bad in the outfield as Winker. So that means he is playable. The Mariners will no doubt make him play the outfield most of the time. I think personally, I would rather see him in left field, but it sounds like, based on if they don't sign Haniger, especially if they keep Winker, or if they, want JK to play in the outfield, then I think Teoscar probably has to play right, which may not be as fun for us, but like I said, it's not nearly as bad as it could be. One of the other downsides, in addition to, obviously the short contract we mentioned before, is the fact that his plate discipline is not very good. His career walk rate is just 7.4%, and his career K rate is around 30%. So this is, not at all Winker in that regard, because Winker, even if he's not hitting, can still draw a walk, doesn't strike out all that much. So that's kind of the player the Mariners are getting. They're getting a guy who will fit into the middle of the order. He's going to hit 25 to 30 homers, most likely. His batting average last year was, I think, in around the 260 range, which was low for him, but he's going to hit, and that's what the Mariners need. The question to me at this point remains, will they extend his contract, kind of like they did with Luis Castillo, or are they going to let him play the year out and see how things go from there? I could see a scenario where they sign him to an extension like late in the summer if things are going well. I don't know if they're going to do it now, because that would limit a lot of their options for the rest of the winter. But what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it. I mean, from a team perspective, speaking as a fucking whatever, I don't think it makes much sense. I think if you let him walk next year, or you let him test free agency, you either get him back, and like that's the extension, or you get a pick. He gets,
well, assuming he has a good year this year and is worthy of a qualifying offer.
which I mean, based on his last like half decade, I tend to think he
Right.
will. It's so I tend to think he is a Haniger replacement as of right now.
That's what I'm thinking too.
They, at least, in this past year, kind of similar hitters. Something that stands out about Hernandez is that I think he was it fifth, three, four, five. Okay, he's top 10 in dynamic hard hit percentage. Hard hit percentage I don't love because if you hit a ball hard straight up in the air, that counts as a hard hit, ball, which is very hard to do, and it means that you can hit the fuck out of the ball, but it's not a good result. Whereas dynamically, hard hit balls are. He's top 10%. He hits in terms of exit velocity on fly balls is top 5. Um, I think one thing about him that makes him a good fit in Seattle is looking at his blast percentage, which is basically like on home runs, what percentage of them are hit like I don't remember what the criteria is, but like really hard. He grades out pretty well. This is I don't know, probably top 25. Um just short of like Acuna, Pete Alonso, Suarez, um just short of Soto, and like just ahead of like Rowdy Tellez and like Luke Voigt. So I think that's really important when you consider, you know, he's going to strike out a lot and he's going to put a lot of balls into play. Um, it really matters what happens with those balls. And you need, when you're playing in Seattle, when you have, the heavy marine layer, it's such a, it's so trite. Um, you need guys who can hit the ball really hard. And so I think that he should continue to be really good. Um, yeah, question marks about fielding, but that's kind of what I look at, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I think about him. I don't remember um, if there was a question and I answered it or not, but that is that.
Well, do you want to dive into some questions that we have been asked in Discord?
Let's do it.
All right. We had a good number of questions for this. I think, people obviously excited about the Mariners making a big acquisition. So let's dive into some of the implications. Clay wants to know, there are some reports the team is looking to upgrade left field, but assuming it doesn't come to pass, do you think at least one of Kelnick, Trammell, Lewis, Haggerty, or Winker can be a decent everyday starter in left, or perhaps can there be a passable platoon split among those players?
Is that for me?
Go for it.
Okay. I have some Hello Panda in my mouth, but um if I were a betting man, and I'm not, at least online because I live in Washington State, I would not bet on Kelnick, Trammell, Lewis, Haggerty, or Winker because, well, for one, that'd be a very bad bet depending on what the bet is. I think Winker's gone. I kind of think that Lewis and Haniger can't coexist on the same roster. Um, I mean, Trammell like looked pretty good for a second, but it was really home run reliant, and he didn't finish the year looking good. I mean, it was one game, but Kelnick batted like 10 times. And he didn't do anything, like didn't look even competent. And then
You talking about
Haggerty,
the Astros game?
yeah, the last game of the season. And then Haggerty, is a fun, if not mediocre, um, utility player.
He just had by far the best season of his career.
Right. And like
That he's never gonna be as good as that again.
if he does, I will literally eat a crow. Like a crow. Like not crow, I will eat a crow if he yeah. So passable platoon, maybe.
I think the idea there would be like Winker and Lewis. That would be a potential platoon that could work.
yeah, I would not bet, like, if you're not making other upgrades, which, Teoscar Hernandez is, I wouldn't bet on Winker to bounce back. I do think he will, but I wouldn't, especially because he can't field. And Lewis has like rubber knees. So I think Jerry's right. I think they're gonna add two outfielders, and I think it's gonna be a pretty good one that makes this kind of a non-issue. And seems like most of these guys will be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, my short answer to this question is that if this is, if that is the Mariners crew in left field, something has gone terribly wrong this
Yeah.
winter.
Uh
They have to add at
yeah.
least something else to that mix that is moderately interesting, right? Like even if
Yeah.
that's getting some glove first guy who can bat, decently. It
John
doesn't have to
Jay.
be like an impact player. Yeah. Manuel Margot,
Let's
like
sign John Jay
I don't
from
know.
the who's
Oh
I think the
my
Marlins
goodness.
coaching staff now.
This is totally off topic, but I just saw that the Rangers hired Will Venable as associate manager, and I'm just like, what the fuck is an
What's an associate
associate
manager?
manager?
That's literally like the office. Like,
Yes.
jeez. Well,
All right, anyway. Our good friend Connor wants to know if we think Isaiah Campbell has a shot at bringing Camp out of the bullpen. I would say it is certainly more likely now after this trade that happens. Isaiah Campbell is a filthy reliever. He just transitioned to the bullpen last year. Was really good in high A Everett. They pushed him up to double A Arkansas, and in 14 games, he struck out 16 and a half batters per nine and walked just one batter per nine. The Mariners putting him on the 40 man, I think, is a pretty clear signal that they intend to, have him up this year, because you never do that with a relief prospect if they're more than a year out, right? Like the Mariners did
yeah.
that because they thought if we don't do this, someone else will turn him into a useful reliever next year. So I think that it's pretty clear the Mariners envision him being with the team next year, out of the bullpen. I don't know if that means they think he's going to break camp, but maybe he comes up in the middle of the summer and is really excellent down the stretch. I can see him being one of those, two or three pop up bullpen pieces that they seem to pull out of thin air every single season. I think he's definitely a top candidate for that role.
Yeah, I wish I knew where his velo was, but I mean, it is double A, but I think the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Not a starter, obviously, but yeah, I mean, I tend to think so. And I think that's why you move guys like Erik Swanson's, because you have these guys coming. So, um, I think definitely a shot at breaking camp, and I think probably makes is up at some point in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, the reason you move Eric Swanson's is because you need to make room for these pop up pitchers the Mariners keep getting, right?
Hmm.
Like, if I know I hate to say it, but if Casey Sadler went down, like, would we have gotten Penn Murphy?
Hmm.
Would we have gotten Matt Festa? You need to clear space, whether intentional or, through injury,
Hmm.
um, for these guys to emerge as potential trade pieces down the road,
Yeah.
or just good pieces now. Um, B says 4 spots of the rotation are locked up. If whoever the number 5 guy is ends up performing well enough to keep the spot without question, what do you think it will mean for the timetable and handling of starting pitching prospects like Emerson Hancock, for instance? I'm very intrigued by this question specifically because the Mariners are in on Kodai Senga, and I don't know if they're in on Kodai Senga because they're just like, we think this pitcher specifically is super special, and we just don't want to pass up an opportunity to be in on this market, or if it's we see an opportunity where if we sign another good starter, then we can really take advantage of this pitching surplus. Um, I think whether the Mariners acquire another guy or not, with regards to the timetable and development of Hancock, I think that the Mariners are in a good position where they don't need to rush him or anybody else like him. They can kind of let those guys pitch their way onto the big league staff. And right now, even without adding another player, we've already talked about how competitive that number 5 spot is likely to be between, Hancock, Dollard, Bryce Miller, Prelander Baroa, and Macko and Flexen still coming back at this moment. So, I'm very happy with how the staff is. If they go out and they sign someone like Senga or another player, I will just be over the moon. And it'll maybe be the first time that I'm not worried about, what happens if X player succumbs to injury, because there will be many pitchers to back them up. Now, if I was a betting man, I would say it is more likely the Mariners will be without a starter from the current roster than to have added one that is not on the roster, if that makes any sense. I think it's more likely that they decrease their number of big league experience starters than adding another one.
For all of the shit that I talk about Marco Gonzalez, I mean, he just threw 183 innings of 4.13 ERA ball, which is like actually sounds pretty good, but I think based on the current context is a little below average. That's fine for a number five. I think especially, I mean, the concerns about injuries and workload are getting less dire over time. I mean, you do still have Gilbert, you do still have Kirby, who aren't quite, to where they're going to be in like a year or two. I will say I'm not particularly worried about um I don't think that there's any like Steven Strasburg that's waiting in the wings that you want to get in there, or like Logan Gilbert or George Kirby, even, or at least like 2020 and later George Kirby. Um so I think they'll kind of bring them along as projected, and they'll make the major leagues when it's necessary, maybe a little later. I think it might just mean that their role is shifted. And again, I say this all the time, but that's good teams have those guys waiting that can help out when if it's any of the five, Marco goes down. um, so there aren't that many um starting pitch prospects that I'm like thrilled about. Starting pitching prospects. It's basically Brian Wu and Bryce Miller. Bryce Miller pitched at highest, in high A ball. Brian Wu not even.
Miller got 10 games in Double A.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that actually. Um, so I actually think Bryce Miller is probably the guy that I'm most excited about, but I would not hate kind of babying him and bringing him up and throwing him in the bullpen and giving him some spot starts or whatever. Um, so long story short, you kind of just take them along slow, I think, and it doesn't really matter if you have five guys who can start, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the shine on Hancock has worn significantly. Um, but for injury, obviously, also his stuff just wasn't super impressive last year, compared to what we had seen from him out of college and as a younger prospect in the system. Obviously, there's still plenty of time for him to regain that shine, at the higher levels of the minors. And, with the Mariners, there's very few systems that you would trust to develop him and get him to reach that ceiling. I'm still interested in him, but like you mentioned, I'm more interested in certainly a guy like Bryce Miller, who I would be shocked if he didn't pitch some games for Seattle in 2023, assuming that he's still within the organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Azrael wants to know, what are the odds Seattle signs Kodai Senga and or Masataka Yoshida? I think that Senga's market is going to be super hot, partially because he is a without bars international free agent. He doesn't have to worry about the posting system, so it'll be an actual bidding war. And I think there are teams that need starting pitching and have fuck tons of money to spend that are going to go in on him. Specifically thinking of the Mets. Like, I do not see the Mariners outbidding the Mets for his services, both on a level of need and on a level of budget. the Mariners are not going to spend a lot of money. We don't like to think about that, but we know it's true. And I don't think that that's how they're going to allocate their budget, is outbidding the Mets for Senga. But I would be thrilled if they got him. And when it comes to Yoshida, I think that's definitely more likely, specifically because of the posting system, the way the posting system works. I think there's going to be a number of teams that put max bids on him, but I don't know how he feels with the Mariners among those squads. And another thing about Yoshida that we need to note is that his defense is also very poor. There's a lot of similarities between him and the Teoscars and Winkers of the world, in that he should really not be playing much outfield. In fact, he played more DH last year in Japan than he played in the outfield. So I don't really know if there's a fit for him knowing that information. I think the Mariners need someone who can really field, especially if they keep Winker. They need someone who can field alongside Julio, and they can't take another liability in the outfield unless they want to take the Phillies approach of fuck it, let's just slug the shit out of the ball and hope nobody hits it into the outfield. But what do you think about those two players, Mikey?
I long I long for a year when, especially when you have Julio Rodriguez in center field, that you have competent fielding in all three positions and competent hitting too. And that's not exactly like with Teoscar Hernández, like that's already kind of called into question. Like Julio can, I think, make up for some of that, but it's not ideal. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
this trade really crushed your Nemo dreams. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, maybe not. Uh I think you know, I think I trust the Mariners' ability to make, good decisions. Um so if they think that, the bat outweighs the maybe questionable defense, and I actually don't super know, but I mean playing DH in Japan isn't ideal. So, if they like him, I think that there's probably a reason, and I've said before, I don't know about their ability to develop and sometimes identify hitters. Um, I mean, yeah, I think maybe my expectations are too high, maybe based on our pitching development, but um, I think Senga is not going to happen too. I think the odds are, even though that they for whatever reason are like seen as the favorites, I think are
Are they?
I think so.
No, that's news to
Maybe I
me.
don't know.
I've been hearing a lot of Mets chatter, so that's I also follow a lot of Mets fans, so it's hard to know.
Uh,
I see so many SNY tweets out there.
yeah, maybe I'm wrong. I might be. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think that's less likely. I think just because Yoshida's skill set is not one that's highly sought after. It's more realistic. But I don't know. I hope. I kind of hope that they have some other flexibility if that is the move. So not likely and somewhat likely.
I do wonder about Yoshida if he wasn't just Teoscar fallback option, because
Mm,
the Mariners showing interest in him could have
yeah.
been they were doing their due diligence, not knowing whether they were going to get Teoscar or a player like Teoscar. So they seem to be similar players, and I wonder if that was just kind of what they were doing there. And to that extent, maybe Nimmo is still within the picture because Nimmo is very much a different kind of player. So if the Mariners were interested in Nimmo, I don't necessarily know if acquiring Teoscar precludes them from going after Nimmo, but it may on the budget front, especially if they want to address the middle infield through signing. So I'm curious if that's in the cards still. But we said, I think, last podcast that we thought they had a big signing in them, or like a semi big signing in them, and a big trade in them. And they've done the big trade, and they did the big trade in the outfield. I was kind of wondering if it wasn't going to be the other way around, where they sign an outfielder, trade for an infielder. They could obviously still trade for an infielder too. Maybe they won't make a big signing, but this to me makes it seem like signing one of the big four infielders becomes more likely because they didn't splurge all their budget on outfield.
They
But
probably just won't. I
you're
honestly,
you're right. I think you're right, unfortunately. Especially if they're going to go hard after Otani next year. And another point to that, that's been my long conspiracy, is that everything that Jerry has done is lining up to make a big,
mm,
Otani run. This did not change that because they didn't add any money onto the books for 2024 with this trade.
yeah,
So I feel like it's all coming together.
maybe.
We got one more question. This one's from Ian. Just had a random thought. I am concerned with Teoscar long term, but how does his profile compare to Nelly Cruz at younger ages? This is, being very snarky about this, but Teoscar is only 30. Nelson Cruz was still a baby at 30 years old. He hadn't done shit yet in the majors. But I think the essence of the question is compared to where, Nelly was, I guess, when the Mariners acquired him, perhaps. I think one of the big differences is that Nelly has much better plate discipline and always did. Um, and also, Nelson Cruz was a better power hitter than Teoscar was. Cruz was hitting 35 and 40 homers, and Teoscar's merely hitting 20 to 25 homers a season. So I feel like there's a big difference in profile there. Another thing is that Teoscar, which we haven't mentioned yet, has not played 150 games yet in a season. He's usually around the 130 range. So it seems like he's not able to stay as healthy as Nelly often was. Nelly was just kind of steady Eddie, just always, plugging along, getting his ABs and hitting tons of dingers at the DH spot. So I think Nelson Cruz is a unicorn. And I don't know if we will ever see a player like him again that just like explodes onto the scene late in his career and just like defies father time for forever. I worry about how Teoscar's skill set will age as he gets deeper into his 30s, specifically because his plate discipline is already pretty shitty. But the Mariners may not have to worry about that if they only have him for a year or two. So I guess that's my answer to that question.
I think it's I think it's two things that separate them. Um, well, the third being that Nelson Cruz is a unicorn and like the latest bloomer. I think that there are two main, kind of characteristics that separate them. One being, I think it's less plate discipline and more when that pitch is identified or not, missing, just whiffing. I think, there's a correlation between strikeout percentage and power. So like pretty much all power hitters have swing and miss in their game. Part of what makes Nelson Cruz special is that he has insane power, and his swing and misses. Um, it's not insignificant, but it's not like Joey Gallo. Teoscar Hernandez is, he's a little bit worse. Like even if you just let's see, look at pitches in the zone. Cruz is a career in the Statcast era, 78% zone contact. Hernandez is 74. So it's like not the most, but if like you looked at a list of players, that would separate them by a lot. So it's that, and also when they get their bat on the ball, Nelson Cruz is just a step higher, a tier higher, and he walks a little bit more. So, which has to do with the swing and miss. So I would say those are the two things, but I don't think it's a bad comp. Because they are similar skill sets. They're just not or identical players. I kind of wonder if Hernandez would pull the ball more, if he would turn into even more of a monster. Anyways, that's my take.
Teoscar's also faster than Cruz was. Now,
Yeah,
Cruz
yeah.
did steal the occasional base, but Teoscar like could get like 10 stolen bases in a season. He had 12 in 2021. He had 32 homers and 12 steals. So, I think he's more of a stolen base threat. I don't know how that's aging. He's only getting older. His legs are only getting older.
Mm.
I don't know if he'll steal double digits again, but I think he's got a little bit more speed in his game. Like, I don't really know if the Mariners are going to pinch run for him
Yeah.
the way that they would have with Nelly. So
Yeah.
that's another that's a positive that he has over Cruz, I would say.
Yeah. Good runner. Just I think probably the stop and start isn't great, and maybe not the like timing or instincts, because I think he's
Right.
projected for like 6 stolen bases. So not a huge feature of his game, but maybe it helps. I have a question for you before we go.
Yeah, go for it.
What do you think about Gleyber Torres?
You're sick in the head, King.
That's right.
I don't really think about Gleyber Torres, but let me pull up his page.
I mean,
oh dear.
I think I actually don't know if he played how
wow,
much.
he's actually projected for 3.5 wins. Like,
Oh, he played mostly second base, and even though his defense isn't that good by OAA, it is by DRS and UZR, which probably means that you can deploy him in a way that his defense is plus.
Okay.
And a decent
Here's my
bat,
question
he's
for you.
25.
Why would the Yankees trade him?
Yankees fans hate him.
Yeah, they also hate Josh Donaldson though, and they've already agreed that they're going to keep him for next year for some fucking reason.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a super good question, because they're dying for Jesse Winker and Dylan Moore.
You receive Zach DeLoach and Chris Flexen. I receive Gleyber Torres
and a first round pick.
and Aaron Judge after you sign him.
I mean, like, I don't know. Well, no, they probably don't want to get super old. But like, how was DJ LeMahieu? Was he really bad? No, he was a 3-WAR player. He's projected to be on the bench right now. All right, give us DJ LeMahieu.
That's probably more likely.
Nah,
I just don't think the Yankees can afford to get any older. I think Gleyber is like one of the few young, good players they have. And I think that it's only possible if the Mariners were offering something just as young and exciting. And no, I don't mean Jared Kelenic.
It's pretty young.
I'm thinking like Logan Gilbert, which I don't think the Mariners would do, but that's who they'd ask for.
Gross.
For that kind of player, like, because Yankees media would pound the Yankees into the ground if they gave up Gleyber Torres for anything less than that. So I don't think it's happening, but I like where your head's at, Mikey.
You're not gonna bully me like I bullied you for what was it? Not Sam Hilliard, the other Rockies guy.
Oh, Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah.
No. I still think that's in play.
I think it's fine. I just don't want that to be the plan.
Well, I certainly hope not. Now that they've already done their trade and seemingly have budget room,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be satisfied with anything less than a splurge middle infield. But
I guess we'll see
satisfied
by anything more than a splurge. Oh, good God.
On that note, I'm Anders Jorstad, and you can find me on Twitter at Anders Jorstad. You can find Mikey on Twitter at _Kuya Mikey, and you can find our good friend Evan at Evan James Audio. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Additionally, you can support the Patreon by going to patreon.com/NeverSunnyInSeattle. Thanks for listening, and go Mariners.